It is 4:47 in the morning on a Thursday in late March, and two Bearcat G3 armored vehicles are rolling without sirens across a frost-cracked industrial access road on the eastern edge of Columbus, Ohio. The street is called Hargrove Distribution Parkway. No residents, no witnesses, just a long, low concrete building. 40,000 square feet, roll-up dock doors painted the same gray as the sky. And inside it, a secret that took 16 months and 4 federal agencies to fully understand. 31 agents from the United States Secret Service Financial Crimes Division and the FBI's Financial Intelligence Unit are staged in 2 stacks behind the lead Bearcat. Body armor marked in yellow. Case files running to 612 pages. And they are about to make 47 people's Thursday very different from any Thursday those people had planned. At 4:51 a.m., the first Bearcat stops 12 feet short of dock door number 4. The second positions laterally at the building's secondary access. A RAM team advances on foot. At 4:53 a.m., the door comes up. What agents find on the other side will confirm everything in those 612 pages and raise a question that nobody in the gift card industry wants to answer. Because this case did not begin with a tip, a wiretap, or an informant walking in off the street. It began with a number so small that most analysts would have rounded it away and gone home. It began with 0.3%. Somewhere in this building, on pallets wrapped in clear industrial plastic, sit 211,000 blank and preloaded gift cards. Beside them, 7 industrial encoding rigs, the size of desktop printers, capable of writing new account data onto a card's magnetic stripe in under 2 seconds. And stacked in a backroom cage behind a simple padlock, $4,200,000 in banded cash. The rounding error that cracked this open could fit inside a single cell of a spreadsheet. And yet it connects to 84,000 drained consumer accounts, 9 states, a cartel money-moving apparatus, and $128 million in laundered funds. This is how a gap that small became a case this large. And this is the story of the agents who decided the math did not add up, long before anyone else thought to check. The Financial Crimes Unit of the United States Secret Service does not work the way most people imagine. No car chases in most of their cases. No stash houses with lookouts on the corner. What there is, in a low-lit office in Columbus, Ohio's resident agency, is data. Enormous, relentless, procedural data. In the spring, 2 years before the raid, a financial intelligence analyst named in court documents only as Analyst First, we'll call her Rourke, was running a routine reconciliation audit on regional gift card fulfillment networks as part of a broader Secret Service monitoring program targeting retail financial infrastructure. The program had been running for 2 years without generating a significant flag. Rourke was on her 4th straight hour of activation logs when she noticed it. One fulfillment center, a mid-size regional facility outside Columbus, was reporting a card activation rate of 0.3% higher than its outbound shipping manifest could account for. 0.3%. On a given day, that might be 3 cards per 1,000. It looks like a rounding artifact. It looks like a database sync delay. It looks like the kind of thing you flag in a footnote and revisit next quarter. Rourke did not file a footnote. She pulled 14 months of data. And when she stacked the activation logs against the shipping manifests across those 14 months, 422 individual reporting periods, the gap did not fluctuate the way a software artifact would. It held at 0.3%, consistently, almost surgically. Over 14 months, that consistent gap represented 211,000 cards activated inside the facility that were never logged as shipped to a retail destination. 211,000 cards that, to the outside world, did not exist. She called them ghost cards. That single observation, filed on a Tuesday afternoon, opened a case that would run for 16 months, cross 9 state lines, involve 4 federal agencies, and end on a frost-cracked road in Columbus at 4:47 in the morning. I spent time with the publicly available elements of the court record, and one detail in Rourke's initial memo kept pulling at me. She noted that the 0.3% figure had already been reviewed and signed off on by 2 separate certified auditors in annual compliance reviews. 2 sets of professional eyes. Both missed it, not because they were careless, because they were looking at the number in isolation, not in sequence. The ghost was hiding in the trend, not the snapshot. The case was formally opened under a joint investigation protocol between the Secret Service's Criminal Investigative Division and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. The lead case agent on the Secret Service side, referred to in court documents as Special Agent Carver, had spent 11 years working financial infrastructure fraud. The FBI's point agent, referred to as Special Agent Tillman, brought background in organized crime money movement. From the beginning, they agreed on one thing. The consistency of that 0.3% suggested the gap was not a malfunction, it was a managed process. Someone inside the facility, or with access to the facility's encoding systems, was running a parallel activation pipeline. The ghost cards were being created deliberately, held internally, and then loaded with value from somewhere outside normal retail channels. The question was, where was the value coming from, and where was it going? The first answer came from transaction analysis. The Secret Service's Financial Intelligence Unit pulled reload transaction data across 12 affiliated card networks. They were looking for reload events, moments when value was added to a card's account after initial activation, that matched the signature of the ghost card pool. It took 6 weeks of pattern analysis to isolate the signal. But when they found it, it was unmistakable. Reload bursts, high-volume, high-speed value transfers onto large batches of cards, were occurring in tight clusters. Not random, not retail paced. The bursts happened at night, typically between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., and they were concentrated around specific encoding shift windows at the Columbus facility. The reload source was not a retail consumer. It was a bulk transfer node, a financial conduit pushing value onto the ghost cards in amounts ranging from $200 to $800 per card, across batches of several hundred cards at a time. The transfer node was itself fed by a layered wire structure that, when the FBI's forensic accountants began peeling it back, pointed toward financial infrastructure associated with cartel money movement operations. The ghost cards were not being used to buy groceries. They were being used to launder drug proceeds. Here's what strikes me about this particular mechanism, and it took a while to fully appreciate it, if appreciate is even the right word. Traditional money laundering requires moving cash through businesses, real estate, financial instruments. All of those leave trails. Gift cards, once loaded, are essentially anonymous bearer instruments. They can be handed off physically, spent at any retail point of sale, or liquidated through secondary resellers without triggering the same reporting thresholds as wire transfers. The ghost card pipeline was, in effect, a private currency printing operation, one that printed value directly from narco wire proceeds and handed it out in the form of something you could use at a drugstore checkout. What's most surprising about this case isn't the scale. It's how long the mechanism was hiding in plain sight, certified clean by auditors, signed off in compliance reports, invisible to everyone except one analyst who decided that 0.3% was worth a second look. By month 4 of the investigation, Carver and Tillman had a structural map of the network. They knew the Columbus facility was the production node, the place where ghost cards were created and encoded. They had identified reload burst patterns linking the facility to at least 8 secondary distribution points across 9 states: Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, Texas, Arizona, Nevada, California, and Florida. What they did not yet have was a human connection. Transaction data and activation logs could show the mechanism. They could not yet show who was running it, who was protecting it inside the facility, and, critically, who was moving the loaded cards to end users. They needed an inside line. The decision to deploy an undercover buyer was made at month 5. A Secret Service undercover operator, referred to in documents as UC1, was given a cover identity as a bulk gift card reseller operating out of a front company in Cincinnati. The cover legend was built over 6 weeks. A registered LLC, a functional website, a history of small legitimate card purchases through normal wholesale channels, and a phone number that had been active for 8 months. UC1's first approach to the network was indirect. Through a contact developed by a Secret Service confidential source in the secondary card market, UC1 made an inquiry about purchasing large volumes of preloaded cards at a discount, the kind of purchase a legitimate liquidator might make, but at volumes that signaled something else to anyone paying attention. The first meeting happened in a parking structure in Dayton, Ohio. 2 men arrived in a rented Chevrolet Suburban. UC1 wore a wire. The conversation lasted 37 minutes. By the end of it, UC1 had agreed to purchase 5,000 preloaded cards at 60 cents on the dollar, a discount deep enough to be unambiguous, but not so extreme as to raise suspicion about UC1's own legitimacy. The men gave UC1 a burner number. They called themselves logistics coordinators. They were, in fact, 2 of the 11 individuals who would eventually be named in the top tier of the indictment. They were the human bridge between the Columbus facility and the cartel-connected reload node. The wire UC1 was wearing that afternoon in the Dayton parking structure captured 37 minutes of conversation that the prosecution would later describe in court filings as, quote, the evidentiary cornerstone of the government's case. But the investigation was about to hit its first serious wall. At month 7, the confidential source who had facilitated UC1's introduction to the network went dark. No contact for 11 days. The handlers could not reach the source through any of the established channels. For nearly 2 weeks, the case team did not know if the source had been burned, had fled, or was simply in a situation that prevented contact. If the network had identified the source as a federal cooperator, UC1's cover was potentially blown. And if UC1's cover was blown, the entire undercover strand of the investigation was over, and possibly worse than over. Carver and Tillman had to make a decision: pause the undercover operation and risk losing momentum, or continue and accept the possibility that UC1 was walking into a compromised network. They paused. For 9 days, UC1 stood down. On day 11, the source resurfaced. The source had not been burned. The source had been dealing with a personal family emergency and had broken protocol out of panic rather than exposure. The network had not been alerted. The undercover strand resumed. But the 9-day pause had consequences, one of which would not become clear until month 12. What no one expected, and what the case file reflects in a way that is almost uncomfortable to read, is what the 9-day pause allowed to happen at the distribution end of the network. During those 9 days, the Columbus facility ran 3 encoding shifts that were not captured on the surveillance wire UC1 had established. 3 shifts. An estimated 22,000 additional cards encoded and moved. 22,000 cards that would require months of additional transaction tracing to locate in the downstream financial system. More significantly, during those 9 days, one of the 11 logistics tier individuals, referred to in the indictment as Subject 7, made contact with a second fulfillment facility in the Nashville, Tennessee area. A backup node. A contingency. The network was expanding while the investigation was paused. Carver and Tillman learned about the Nashville contact through toll records subpoenaed in month 9. By then, the Nashville facility had already processed an estimated 14,000 additional ghost cards. The investigation had to extend its geographic scope, adding 2 more states to the target map and requiring coordination with Secret Service and FBI field offices in Tennessee and Georgia. The 16-month timeline of this investigation was not the result of bureaucratic slowness. It was the result of a network that kept moving. By month 10, the undercover operation had generated 11 controlled transactions between UC1 and the logistics tier of the network. Total value exchanged across those transactions: approximately $3.4 million in preloaded ghost cards, purchased by UC1 at the 60 cents on the dollar rate, and immediately transferred to a Secret Service evidence lockup. Each transaction was documented with audio, with geotag timestamps, and with serial number logs of every card exchanged. The serial numbers were then cross-referenced against the activation and reload records to confirm that each card traced back to the Columbus ghost card pipeline. The prosecution's financial case was built on that cross-reference. Not on the undercover transactions themselves, those proved criminal intent, but on the full chain: ghost card created at Columbus, reloaded through cartel-connected wire node, handed off through logistics tier, sold to UC1, serial number matched to activation record. Every link in the chain, documented. Put yourself in Special Agent Tillman's position for a second. By month 10, you are looking at a map that spans 9 states, 47 individuals at various tiers of a network, 11 documented undercover transactions, and a financial trail connecting a Columbus warehouse to cartel money movement. You have 600 pages of case file. You have the evidentiary cornerstone. And you know that the network is still operating, still creating ghost cards, still loading them with laundered value, still draining consumer accounts at a rate that the FBI's Victim Services Division estimates is running at roughly 11,000 accounts per month. Every day the takedown is delayed, more consumers are victimized, but a premature takedown, one that arrests the logistics tier before the financial evidence is fully mapped, risks the top-tier principals walking on procedural grounds. The agents held. Month 11. Month 12. In month 12, the FBI's financial forensics team completed the full mapping of the reload wire structure. They had traced the bulk transfer node back through 4 layers of shell entities, 2 domestic LLCs, 1 foreign holding structure, 1 cryptocurrency conversion layer, to source funds consistent with known cartel financial infrastructure. That finding was presented to the Department of Justice financial crimes prosecutor assigned to the case, and it triggered the formal authorization for a takedown operation. Here's a take that will probably get some pushback. The auditors who signed off on that 0.3% gap for over a year are not blameless. Compliance auditing in the gift card and prepaid financial instrument space operates on snapshot methodology. You look at a period, you verify the numbers balance, you sign. Nobody is contractually required to run a 14-month sequential trend analysis. But the fact that nobody was required to is itself the problem. The exploit did not live in a flaw in the accounting, it lived in a gap in what accounting was asked to do. And that gap is a policy choice, not an accident. The industry wrote the compliance standards. The industry decided that sequential trend analysis of activation versus shipment ratios was not required. That decision cost 84,000 people money they will not fully recover. Month 13 brought a complication that nearly forced the timeline to collapse. One of the 11 logistics tier targets, Subject 3, in the indictment, was flagged by a routine FBI financial monitoring algorithm as preparing to leave the country. Subject 3 had purchased a one-way ticket to a country without a U.S. extradition treaty. Departure. 17 days from the date the flag was generated. The case team had been planning for a coordinated, simultaneous, multi-city takedown. The kind of operation where all 47 targets are taken off the board within a single operational window, preventing anyone in the network from alerting anyone else. A single city, single node takedown at Columbus would have achieved the physical seizure but allowed the network's outer tiers to scatter. Subject 3's travel plans forced a decision. Accelerate the entire timeline by 6 weeks, or accept the risk of losing one of the top 11 to a jurisdiction that could not be compelled to cooperate with extradition proceedings. They accelerated. The coordination required to move a 47-person, 9-state, 4-agency takedown 6 weeks forward, while maintaining operational security, was, by the case agent's own description in a pre-trial filing, the most logistically demanding element of the entire investigation. Subpoenas staged for later weeks had to be fast-tracked. Arrest warrant packages for targets in 6 cities had to be finalized and approved simultaneously. Surveillance on all 47 individuals had to be maintained through the accelerated period without any of the targets detecting the uptick in federal attention. And through all of it, UC1 continued to operate, making one final controlled transaction in month 15, 11 days before the raid, that would become the last piece of evidence added to the case file. The night before the Columbus raid, the case team held a final operational briefing at the Secret Service field office. 31 agents in Columbus. Coordinated teams in 6 additional cities: Cincinnati, Nashville, Atlanta, Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles, standing by for simultaneous execution. The Columbus team had the primary target: the warehouse on Hargrove Distribution Parkway, the 7 encoding rigs, the pallet of ghost cards, and 3 individuals known to be on overnight shift. The question of the overnight shift had been a tension point for weeks. Surveillance confirmed that the facility ran encoding operations through the night, typically 3 to 5 individuals on the reload floor between midnight and 5 a.m. The raid timing was set for the early morning window, specifically to catch those individuals in the act of encoding operations, providing direct physical evidence of the mechanism rather than relying solely on transaction records and undercover testimony. What surveillance could not definitively confirm, up to the night before the raid, was whether the encoding rigs would be actively running at the moment of entry. If the team breached and found the floor in a rest period, machines powered down, cards not actively being processed, the evidence of in-progress criminal activity would be thinner. Carver made the call, 4:47 a.m. The surveillance team's most recent window data showed encoding activity typically peaking between 4 and 5 in the morning. At 4:43 a.m. on a Thursday in late March, the convoy staged at the end of Hargrove Distribution Parkway. At 4:47 a.m., the Bearcats rolled. At 4:51, they stopped at dock door number 4. At 4:53, the door came up. What agents found inside was better than the surveillance models had suggested. All 7 encoding rigs were running. 2 pallets of ghost cards, each pallet holding approximately 95,000 cards in plastic-wrapped blocks, sat on the reload floor under fluorescent light. 3 individuals were present, actively processing cards through the encoding rigs. A 4th was in an adjacent office area. At 4:54 a.m., all 4 were in handcuffs on the floor of the reload area. At 4:56 a.m., the Columbus operation radioed green to the coordination center. 1 minute later, simultaneous entry teams in Cincinnati, Nashville, Atlanta, Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles executed on their targets. By 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time, 44 of the 47 individuals named in the indictment were in federal custody. Subject 7, the individual who had established the Nashville backup node during the 9-day surveillance pause, was taken without incident at a residence in Smyrna, Tennessee, at 5:08 a.m. Central. The remaining 3 targets were in custody within 72 hours. Subject 3, the individual whose travel plans had forced the 6-week schedule acceleration, was arrested at Nashville International Airport, 17 days before the flight that had been booked to a non-extradition destination. The timing margin was 16 hours. The seizure inventory from the Columbus warehouse alone, 211,000 blank and preloaded cards, 7 industrial encoding rigs, model designations consistent with commercial magnetic stripe rewrite hardware, each valued at between $14,000 and $22,000. $4.2 million in banded US currency stored in a locked cage in the warehouse's rear storage section. Transaction logs, encoding schedules, and a physical ledger, a paper ledger, handwritten, that mapped card serial numbers to reload amounts and distribution destinations. That ledger became, in the words of the lead federal prosecutor, the Rosetta Stone of the prosecution. It was the one element of the case that the network's own record-keeping had provided. A physical artifact that cross-validated every inference the investigation's data analysis had produced over 16 months. The full indictment carried 31 counts across 47 individuals. Charges included wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, identity theft, and, for the 6 individuals at the top of the network, charges related to the conspiracy to launder proceeds of narcotics trafficking. The sentencing range for the top-tier principals, under federal guidelines, runs from 12 to 22 years. The logistics tier faces sentencing ranges of 5 to 12 years. Plea negotiations were ongoing at the time the public case record was closed, and multiple individuals in the lower tiers of the network had entered cooperation agreements with the government. Total financial exposure across all defendants, civil forfeiture orders seeking recovery of $128 million in laundered proceeds, plus restitution orders to the 84,000 consumer victims whose accounts were drained through the ghost card reload mechanism. The average victim loss was approximately $1,520. Some victims lost less than $200. Some lost more than $4,000. The funds drawn from victim accounts moved through the reload wire structure and into the ghost card system, meaning that ordinary consumers were the unwitting fuel source for a cartel money laundering apparatus. Their money was not stolen to enrich retail thieves. It was stolen to clean drug proceeds. Something about that specific dynamic doesn't sit right, even now. The victims of this network were not targeted because of who they were. They were targeted because they had gift card accounts attached to reload-capable networks, because they were statistically available. The selection was algorithmic, the victimization was structural, and the 84,000 people who woke up to find their accounts drained had no way of knowing that their loss was connected to cartel narcotics revenue flowing through a warehouse on an industrial road in Columbus, Ohio. Here's something worth sitting with. The 7 encoding rigs seized from the Columbus warehouse are now in federal evidence storage. The 47 individuals indicted are moving through the federal court system. The $128 million in laundered funds is the subject of forfeiture proceedings. The network, as it operated, no longer exists. But the mechanism that created it, the 0.3% gap in gift card reconciliation methodology, that gap still exists in the compliance frameworks of every major prepaid card network in the United States. Rourke's trend analysis was not standard auditing practice before this case. It is not yet standard auditing practice after it. The industry has not mandated sequential activation versus shipment trend monitoring. The individual auditors who signed off on the Columbus facility's compliance reports are not facing charges. They were not breaking any rule that existed. Would you have noticed the signs before it was too late? The two certified auditors who reviewed those same numbers didn't. Not because they lacked skill, but because nobody asked them to look at 14 months of data in sequence. The question is whether we want to keep building compliance frameworks that are only designed to catch what someone already knows to look for. The ghost cards from the Columbus warehouse are in federal custody. But how many other fulfillment networks are running a gap right now that sits at 0.3%? Small enough to round away, consistent enough to mean something, and nobody has yet pulled 14 months of data to find out. We track what comes next. Subscribe to the Bureau files so the next case finds you first. The paper ledger recovered from the Columbus warehouse, the handwritten one that the prosecutor called the Rosetta Stone of the prosecution, was found on a folding table beside encoding rig number 4. It was written in blue ballpoint pen. On the cover, in neat block letters, someone had written a single word: inventory. 211,000 ghost cards, $128 million, 84,000 victims, and one word on a cardboard cover that somebody thought was sufficient to describe all of it. That ledger is sitting in an evidence room in Columbus right now, sealed in a clear plastic bag, tagged with a federal exhibit number. The people who wrote in it are facing decades in federal prison. And somewhere in the gift card industry, a gap the size of a rounding error is still balancing someone's books.